videos have become a bit disjointed because there's been loads of like little bits, like do a little bit to this, a little bit to that. I'll just basically take you through what I've been up to really quickly. So I made these little glazing bars. I had some offcuts of the glazing bar, like the spare pieces from the door left over, and they made up the pieces that are going to cap these glass units to make up the exterior side of the glazing bead. So I've made, sanded and painted them. These are like the tricoya panel infills which will go in the bottom of these panels. There's 4 narrow ones and 2 that are a bit bigger that will go in the bottom of the door. Got a first coat on them yesterday along with the first coat on the door. I'll show you the spraying process of that in a second. I got these bits, which were the cover mouldings. I got them all moulded up on this spindle moulder. I ended up using the same pattern as the frame piece. So this section here on the frame with this sort of flute on it and the bead there, it's actually going to sit on this face here like that and go around the top and down. And it just interacts well at the top with the ceiling, and it'll actually wrap around the brickwork. So they've got to be rebated on site once the frame has been fitted. And I made these sill sections as well, and they're basically going to sit in that groove I've cut there and then be sort of scribed into this moulding. So they both need 2 more coats of paint. One of them needs this sort of sanding back to like a absolutely perfectly matted finish to get the perfect finish on the final coat, which is incredibly time consuming and what I've been doing a lot of in the last few days. These sill sections were just made up on the spindle, beveled a cutter over and basically cut a round on the bandsaw, sanded it in on my little disc sander, and then set a bevel on a disc sander as well to create this sort of beveled end, so it looks sort of the perimeter gap around the front. I gauged this line around the front and created an even sort of spacing around the front of that sill and beveled it back up, and then I stopped the groove at the back of that bevel, and then the groove stops at where that bevel starts, and it's going to sit something like that in the frame. And then in this video we're going to be getting that perfect finish. So this is the finishing video. Every day I've been building up a layer of paint on this frame. I'll flip it over a bit later on and show you what it looks like before I start sanding it. But just basically painting a layer of paint on and building up the thickness so that when I sand it back, I can get it back to like this almost perfect sanded finish with none of this, you see, like where it's gone glossy. That's what I want to try and avoid. So you want to try and get it so it's completely matte on the whole surface and it's perfectly smooth. And then when you give your final brush coat on top of that surface, it looks absolutely gorgeous. You can see I've filled these are the screw holes that I screwed this rail through here with, and I fillered them. And if you remember, I did a video on sort of sanding and chiseling them back and block sanding this through. Basically, once you've block sanded it through and used the, not gone through the paint, you're just left with filler in the middle. I've just painted over it, used 320 grit paper to sand the paint back, and that layer of paint is basically like a layer of filler because it's finer than filler. It'll fill all the imperfections in that interaction between the paint and the filler, and you just get a really dead smooth finish over the top of it. So treat the first coat of paint almost like a layer of fine surface filler, sand it back, and then you get your perfect finish like it's invisible. Don't be afraid to keep putting new discs on your sander. You can, like, the sharpness of the paper makes a massive difference to the keying of the paint. So yeah, using an old disc that looks clean but isn't sharp will just be sort of rubbing the paint rather than cutting into it. So most of it can do with the random orbit, or I like the little Delta sander with 320 grit from Festool. Make sure your hoover's attached and keep it on low speed to stop it sort of melting the paint rather than sanding it. And then stuff like this, these bars here, first coat, I'm not going to go too mad trying to sand it back, it's just a waste of time. So just use the same technique as before, so you work in right-handed and just do all your right-hand ones. I'm just knocking off any high spots, any dust or raised grain going through there, knocking that off. Again, a 320 pad, like a foam back pad. This paint here is not quite dry enough yet, it's chalking up a little bit. Exterior coatings do need to be dry before you recoat them, actually you get problems with it. It's sort of sealing in water vapour and it will peel that next layer of paint off. Right, so this paint finish I've been building up, there's about 4 brush coats on here just as a building layer. So I'm going to sand this back now. I've got 320 grit granite paper on my sander. I'm just going to turn the speed right down to low. I'm just going to sit the sander on the surface and work up to the edge that's sort of away from me so I can see it, and just work into this edge. It's really easy to sit the sander on the surface and sand along there, but what you'll end up doing is just taking the paint off this edge and this edge and not sanding the middle enough. So kind of got to tilt the sander at half a degree, it'd be ideal, so it doesn't really put any pressure on this edge as you're working this edge in. And then you work that edge in, just keep like butting into it and moving away so you can see what's happening to it. And as soon as that is fully sanded, move on to your next, which don't sand it anymore. It's very rare that you'll sort of sand through in the middle but not have the edge sanded, so the edges are the bit that you want to keep your eye on. So I'm not too fussed about this sort of like from here outwards, because there's going to be like a door lining casing going around here, so the outside edge of this frame isn't essential, so I'm not really going to waste too much time getting a finish on that. I'm just going to make sure it's flat. But yeah, the quality of your finish now really is in getting these little bits of like glossy material sanded down to, so it takes you seconds to flat it back so it feels flat, but to get them bits out there like that, you've got to sand everywhere that's already been sanded. You've got to take the material away from to get to that unsanded bit. So yeah, the further into the finish you get, the longer it takes to get these imperfections out. So this frame here, just to sand this face and the opposite side face, it's probably going to take me 2 hours to go over that and sand it all, get a nice finish out of it. And there will be places where I sand through it and I'll have to sort of brush a bit more paint on and then repeat the process until I've got a perfect finish. That really is the difference between like a high-end finish and you can get an okay finish just by banging 3 spray coats on with a very light delip between, because the paints tend to like smooth out quite well, but it's not as good. It's not the same. So don't confuse a perfect finish with a just a good quality finish. Yeah, just the rounded bits now. I pre-finished all these, and hopefully you can see why I did that before I glued it together, because sanding into a moulding like that and getting right in the corner without taking the paint off too much just away from the corner is impossible. Like, it's not hard. That is an impossible task. So I've already got a finish on all them internal corners, which is yeah, just perfect really. You can't go through it any other way, in my opinion. This foam back paper is great, just like single-sided, but it's very gentle. And what you want to do, you don't want to be feeling the wood or the sandpaper through the foam, so the pressure you put on the back of the foam is enough. If you go in deep enough to feel the wood, you're applying too much pressure. So the foam is like the regulation for how hard you're pressing. Right, here we go. This side of the frame is ready for that final top coat. Just giving it a hoover off with the vacuum and like a dust brush to get rid of all any surface dust and stuff. I am in the workshop. I don't normally paint in the workshop, but this thing's really too big to get into my spray booth and carry up there. Giving this paint a real good stir. Somebody had said that, I bet you're glad you're painting it to sort of not have the trouble of doing a clear finish on the frame. Well, clear, like, don't want anyone to go into a project and have an unexpected problem, but clear finishing is way easier than it is to put a really high quality paint finish on something. Because you can get away with murder with a clear. You can kind of little divots and stuff in it, you just lacquer over it and you don't see it. Whereas painted finish has got to be as perfect as you can get it, or it shows up like a sore thumb. You can see in that sanding, like even along here, there's still imperfections in it. It won't matter for this because they're brush painted, but if I was going to spray this to the perfect finish, I'd be coming along here again. Just need another coat of paint and another full sand, which is a lot of work. That's another day. So yeah, don't be under the illusion that a clear finish is harder. Because clear finishing is a lot quicker and easier to put a stain on and a lacquer over it than it is to get a real high quality paint finish. Probably referring to like back in the day, the old joiners shops when you'd supply joinery for either like a stain finish or a painted finish. If it was painted, you'd slap a coat of primer on it. You could use filler everywhere and whack a primer on and send it out. It was a lot easier, you know, than getting all your joints and everything to a stain grade was a lot more work. Finish all your inside edges first. I'm no professional brush painter, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Finish on your light rebate, so there I'll stop on that rebate, and then when I turn it over or work the other side, I can work up to that rebate and wipe it off as it comes onto this edge. On the faces, get a bit of paper towel. You don't want to let these edges build up if you're not painting them straight away, so I just use a bit of paper towel and mop them off so that there's no build up. And when you come along to do this face, see, it's nice and straight and clean. Yeah, that top half's freshly finished, and then this side's just starting to dry. Look down here, you can see the it's skinning over. So it's good to finish on this edge because you'd never get it all painted to a wet edge. Paying extra attention at sort of like this area here because it's eye level. Everyone is going to be, you know, head height is here. So if you're going to make a good job of any part of the frame, it's that bit right there. Tricky little bit of brushing here. It goes in a taper. Right, leave that till the morning. Try not to walk around too much, make any dust. But yeah, some of it's drying off quite nicely there. It's giving a nice little sheen. Oh, big reveal the morning after. It's looking pretty nice, to be fair. I'm quite happy with how that's brushed on. It's a real time-consuming job. I'd say it's a labour of love, but I hate it. It's one of them jobs where it's horrible to do all the sanding part of it, but when you do get a lovely finish at the end of it, it's very rewarding, and it's nice to see that you've got something that other people will not achieve because of the dedication and time it takes to get a finish like that. You just don't see other people doing it, so you can take a lot of pride from the fact that you've achieved it. But the bit in the middle, which is actually the graft involved in doing it, is quite hard work. How do you put across to the customer the difference in a finish like that versus someone that's just going to lob some spray paint at it in a quick denib over and it's done in a day? You've got to be really open with your customer and inclusive in your process to be able to show them the difference in the cost, basically. There's no one here, so I've got to try and lay this down flat and sand and paint the other side of it. I've added these little blocks on so it can sit on the bench without sitting on the finish of this face. So they just raise the face of the frame off the bench. Yeah, I've somehow got to lower it down. It's bloody heavy. More footwork. Nice. Physics broken. We go. I've just done the last coat on the frame on the outer face, so I'm done in here for the night now. I don't want to make any dust, kick any dust up. The frame is now ready to fit, as it's been painted both sides, so that's a nice stage to get to. I've got just waiting on the infill panels. I've been painting them a few times. I can stick the infills to them outer panels that are going to go in here. They're going to be fitted once it's been installed, because I want to get some fixings through in that panel location. So got quite a busy fitting day with glazing and fitting panels and stuff. These beads are ready to go. I painted them like about 5 days ago now. So I'm going to just chop them round in these openings, mitre them round so that they're ready for the fitting day. Best way to fit beads I've found is like a bead like this is sitting on the rebate. So that side, so this side on the rebate, this side on the glass. Mitre one end in like the natural position for the mitre, sort of like this. So mitre sort of facing you, bead up to the fence, so it sort of sits as you look at the bead. So put a mitre on one end on every bead like that. Then I like to use the shortest possible bead for the longest part on the frame. So start with your longest beads. So on this frame here, it's the top beads. Nice sharp pencil, and you can mark like either side, but as we're below this frame, we need to mark the bottom side of the bead. So that top bead, even though this mitre is going in this corner, in this orientation, I can mark it that way around because we've got a square opening. It doesn't matter, it's the same width. And just put a tick line on the rebate side. Tick line like that. Then I take that tick line, just mark it over freehand at 45 degrees so that you can see it when you're marking on the saw. And you hold the bead upside down, and because we've got that sort of little 45 marked over, we can see pretty much where we want to cut. I'm just going to cut a little bit beyond it in case the saw pings the bead off, which quite often happens. If it does ping it off, it tends to deflect the saw blade and cut a little bit inaccurate. So cut away from it, then trim it to final size. Then just to identify them, I always mark the top right of the opening. So I'm just going to drill 2 little holes in there. Finished beads, you could write on them, but I always put drill holes in. If you're going to paint them again, it always keeps the mark through the paint. So this one's number 2, because opening 1, opening 2, opening 3, just so far down the frame. You've got like lots and lots of different openings. You can use different size drill bits and stuff. So yeah, and that bead just wants to sit in, so it's like not tight, but it's a sort of a snug fit. If it's tight and you've done perfect mitres, you're going to be too tight for the frame. Perfect, got that marked up, put it to one side. Always start by putting your little ones in when you're fitting your beads in, so I'll cut the rest of them. The reason I always mark the top right of the opening is then you can mark your beads with the drill holes in the nearest position to that top right position where your mark is. So that bead is drilled there. The bead is orientated like this in the frame. I know that that is the bottom bead because the drill marks at this end, it's nearest to them marked on the frame. So likewise, this one has been drilled at this end of the bead. So them holes need to go nearest to my mark in the top right corner. So the bead has got to go that way around. So that is then the top bead. And so it gives a position and a location for every bead in every opening, which is a really good system. Just sort of pushed them in place. All a bit wonky and stuff, but looks nice. Right, ironmongery. These obviously are polished brass and lacquered. The lacquered polished brass never looks nice over time because it just remains really bright, and where the lacquer fails you get a bit of discoloration, but it never looks even across it. So if you want a proper traditional finish, I've got to sand that back and age this brass down, which you can't get everything all the time in an aged brass finish. That's what this job is going to be, so I'm going to have to age it back myself. I've got these beautiful escutcheons the customer's just given me with a dished inset, so I think I might make a little jig to set them in completely flush, so the face of them is flush with the face of the door, because that'll look really, really nice. So I've got them to go on. They are already in a nice finish, so I don't need to touch them, but I've got to get these ones into some like lacquer stripper, strip the lacquer off, give them a bit of a rubbing over with a non-woven pad, and then age them down. So I'm going to do the screws at the same time, so I'm just going to make sure the screws I've got are the right size, so they're number 10 screws. Perfect, see if I've got enough of them. Always keep a bit of a selection of brass screws. It's gone a bit withered at the minute. I need to replenish a few of them, but there we go, that looks about right for that fitting, so I can age a couple of them down for that. Always keep, for every job, I always keep a box like this. Generally fits all the hinges and ironmongery for a door or a window set in a box like that, and just label them up for each job. It keeps everything nice and tidy. Just drop that in a pot of old gum wash thinners. Gum wash thinners are great. It'll be stripping that lacquer off in about 4 or 5 minutes. If I need it to, I'll just leave it in there for probably till tomorrow now. I've got to make a little jig to recess these in. Decided to go for it. So the nearest drill bit I've got is a little bit too big. So I've got near with a hole saw, which is the closest thing. I always keep a bit of this edge banding, iron-on edge banding. It's like hot melt, but it's yeah, pre-glued edge banding. Should give me a bit better, bit tighter tolerance on that keep. Look, it's about right. About a penny every time I use one of these flush router trim bits. I'll have an handsome couple of quid by now. There you go, the lacquer is well and truly bubbled off them hinges. You can see it will just literally fall off it. So de-lacquered hinges should be just polished brass now. I've got a bit of non-woven pad. It shouldn't be too much effort to go over them. Look at that, beautiful. Just take the polish off them. If you're wondering why don't you just buy aged brass or antique brass hinges, quite often, like if you're on a specialist hinge, like a 6-inch hinge like that, to find it in an antique brass that's actually a nice finish is very hard, and it's quite often 4 or 5 times the price. You might pay 70-80 quid for a pair of hinges in such a big size in an antique brass finish. So to buy some for 30 quid and spend an hour to do all of the ironmongery for the job isn't the end of the world, but it's just another level, isn't it? And just drop it in the aging solution. This is what I'm using. Very good gear, actually. Not for very long. Screws I tend to leave in about 20-25 seconds. Depends how strong you dilute the stuff, but it doesn't take very long at all. You can see them starting to dull over already, the head of that screw, look. Put hinges in there and pour a bit of the fluid on them. Not mixed up enough stuff to completely submerge them, but see how it's immediately aged that hinge, look. It's almost the perfect patina already. See it just in front of your eyes. Aging the brass away, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. I'm not too fussed about them being uneven, because I tend to polish them back a little bit to give it a loved and aged look. They'll keep aging back, keep going darker and darker. Eventually they'll go like completely dark brown, but we're going to stop that soon. rinse them off under the tap, under some water. That's the finished result. I've pulled them out quite early. And you can either get a bit of brasso and just polish them back and it will look just like you've rubbed back an old hinge. But I stick mine in a tumbling machine. It looks like this. I mean, they only just fit in these big ones. Probably not ideal. Take them out, see how they look. Getting there. It's a nice aged finish. It's a bit scratchy up here, so I'll probably get some brasso on that and make some highlights out of the aging. It just looks like a well-worn and properly aged hinge, not like a fake antique brass finish. That is a nice finish, I think, when we're all said and done. See how it looks against the green, shall we? A little bit tight in the housing. Looking sharp, I think. There you go, there's the original polished brass colour next to it. Right, it's time to router these into the actual door. So I've just got to put the lock in the side of it and screw that in place so it's in its final position. And then with the door off the side of the bench so I can see through that lock housing, I've got all my lock lined up. I'm just going to put the jig over the keyhole and stick the discussion in there, and I can line that up so it's in the perfect position. I'm going to check that both way around actually, because it might differ. When it's the right way around, it might sit slightly off centre. It's beautiful. Give that a little try. Probably looks quite big on the screen, but it's tiny. There's a question for you. How would you leave them screws? All vertical? I know some people like to leave them all at 45 degrees. Or would you mirror them? Normally, if it's got like a detail around the rim of that escutcheon, you'd leave them around like that. So they're sort of perpendicular to the centre line of the circle. I'm not sure if you were paying attention in the door glue up video, but I was really particular in setting these glazing bars distances. You can cut some bits of wood of the 3 gaps equal to set them up if you want so that they glue up dead accurate, but it saves a lot of time when you're cutting your beads because you can just set up a stop or a mark on the miter saw and cut every one of these beads off absolutely identical and just bundle them in a pile, and there'll be short ones and long ones, and you just grab 4 and make up a glazing cassette. So I've just set up a little stop on the back of the miter fence, a line, so I can just hold the end of the miter on my line here. Right, sorry about background noise, but I've just got that door in the final coat. I sprayed like a fine layer on, not a full spray thickness, and then ran a brush through it to put a brush finish in it. Putting a paint finish, it's probably one of the most stressful parts of the job I've ever tried to master, is getting the painting right and the paint finish. Paint's just a nightmare. It's a horrible thing to deal with. If they don't get the colour wrong, there's a problem with the paint, and if there's not a problem with the paint, you do something wrong with it, you use it wrong, stuff's out of stock. There's so many things you can go wrong with paint, and it's just a nightmare. But we're fitting this tomorrow, so yeah, here's the door. Got the trim pieces stood up there, glazing beads like the little cover ones, the mini cills, and here's the little window boards and the panels for the frame in their finished coat.